My name is Kia Yazi. I am a ranger with the Forestry Service, stationed near the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. For those who don't know the Rim, it's a massive limestone and sandstone escarpment that cuts across the heart of the state. It's a place of incredible beauty, where the ponderosa pines stand like ancient soldiers guarding the edge of the world. But it's also a place of deep, suffocating shadows. My grandmother, a woman who carried the wisdom of the DNA in every wrinkle of her face, used to tell me that the Rim wasn't just a geographical feature. She called it a seam, a place where the fabric of our world was stitched loosely to something much older and much darker. She warned me never to go near the shadow cave after the sun had touched the horizon. "The old ones," she would say in a voice like dry leaves. "They don't like to be disturbed while they are breathing." I grew up, went to college, and became a ranger. I traded her stories for a badge, a radio, and a Glock 19. I thought science and GPS could map out every ghost in the woods. I was wrong. It was a Thursday in late September. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and drying pine needles. I received a call from dispatch around 4:30 p.m. A group of experienced hikers had reported one of their party missing near the Shadow Cave trailhead. His name was Leo. He wasn't a novice. He knew these woods. But in the Mogollon Rim, experience doesn't mean anything when the shadows start to stretch. I arrived at the trailhead just as the sky was turning a bruised purple. The other hikers were frantic. They told me Leo had wandered off the path to photograph a strange rock formation and simply vanished. They said the woods had gone silent for a moment, not a bird, not a cricket, not even the wind. And when the sound returned, Leo was gone. I told them to stay by their vehicles and wait for the search and rescue team. But I knew the protocol. Every minute counted. I grabbed my pack, checked my flashlight, and stepped onto the trail. The first mile was normal. The sound of my boots on the dry needles was the only thing breaking the silence. But as I drew closer to the area known as Shadow Cave, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature didn't just drop. It felt like the heat was being sucked out of my skin by an invisible vacuum. The light didn't just fade. It seemed to be swallowed by the trees themselves. I noticed the birds first, or rather, the lack of them. In Arizona, the woods are never truly quiet. There's always the chatter of scrub jays or the rustle of a squirrel. But here, the forest was a tomb. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was walking underwater. I reached the limestone shelf that overlooks the entrance to Shadow Cave. The cave isn't huge, but it has a reputation for being hungry. I shined my light toward the entrance, and that's when I saw Leo's camera. It was sitting on a flat rock, perfectly positioned as if he were taking a timed photo of the cave mouth. I picked it up. The screen was still on. I scrolled back to the last photo taken. It was a shot of the cave entrance, but in the center of the dark opening, there was a shape. It wasn't a man. It was a tall, thin silhouette, almost blending into the rock, with eyes that caught the camera's flash in a way that no human eye ever could. They didn't reflect white or red. They reflected a deep, pulsing violet. My hand shook as I tucked the camera into my vest. "Leo?" I called out. My voice felt small, muffled by the heavy air. From the depths of the cave, a sound drifted out. It wasn't a scream, it was a whistle. A long, low, three-note whistle that my grandmother used to use to call me home for dinner. I felt a chill wash over me that had nothing to do with the mountain air. My grandmother had been dead for 10 years. The sound of that whistle, my grandmother's whistle, hung in the air long after it had faded. It felt wrong, like a piece of my childhood had been stolen and twisted into something sharp. I stood on that limestone ledge for what felt like an eternity, my flashlight beam trembling against the mouth of the cave. Every instinct I had, every drop of Dene blood in my veins, told me to turn around, to run until I reached the main road and never look back. But I was a ranger, and Leo was still down there. I adjusted the strap of my pack and stepped off the ledge, descending the rocky slope toward the entrance. The smell hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold. It wasn't the typical damp, earthy scent of a cave. It was something metallic, like the taste of a copper penny mixed with the faint, cloying odor of crushed wildflowers that had been left to rot in a jar. Leo? This is Ranger Yazi. Can you hear me? My voice echoed this time, but the echoes sounded distorted, as if the cave walls were repeating my words back to me with a slight mocking delay. Yazi, hear me. I moved deeper into the first chamber. The limestone walls were damp, glistening under my LED light like the interior of a throat. I kept my eyes on the floor, looking for any sign of a struggle or a trail. That's when I saw the first wrong element. Arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the chamber were small stacks of stones cairns, but they weren't the kind hikers use to mark a trail. These were balanced with impossible precision, some of them 5 feet high, made of stones so thin they should have collapsed under their own weight. And at the top of each stack sat a single dried pine needle, pointing toward the back of the cave. I didn't touch them. I walked around the circle, my skin crawling. The silence was so heavy now that I could hear the internal hum of my own nervous system. As I pushed further into the secondary tunnel, the path narrowed. The ceiling dipped, forcing me to hunch over. The walls here were different, covered in a dark, soot-like substance that felt oily to the touch. I shined my light along the walls and saw markings. They weren't petroglyphs I recognized from any tribe. They were long, jagged scratches deep in the rock, as if something with claws of diamond had been trying to climb out. Help me! The whisper was so faint I almost missed it. It didn't come from ahead of me. It sounded like it was coming from the rock itself, right next to my ear. I spun around, my light scanning the narrow tunnel. Nothing. Just the oily black stone. My heart was thudding so hard in my chest, I thought it would bruise my ribs. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. Focus, Kia. Focus on the job. I pushed through a tight squeeze and emerged into a massive gallery. This was the shadow cave people talked about. It was huge, the ceiling lost in the darkness above. My flashlight could only cut through a fraction of the void. In the center of the gallery, I found Leo. He was sitting on a flat stone, his back to me. He wasn't moving. His head was bowed, and he was humming. It was the same low, 3-note melody I had heard earlier. Leo? Thank God. It's okay. I'm here to get you out. I started toward him, but my boots suddenly felt heavy, as if the floor was becoming magnetic. Leo didn't turn around. He didn't even flinch at the sound of my voice. Leo, we have to go. The SAR team is on the way, but we need to move now. I reached out to touch his shoulder, but just before my fingers made contact, he spoke. His voice was hollow, devoid of any emotion, like he was reading from a script he didn't understand. The old ones. They said you'd come, Kia. They remembered the whistle. He turned his head, then slowly, with a series of wet, clicking sounds in his neck. His face was pale, almost translucent in the white light of my torch. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They weren't brown anymore. The pupils had stretched into long vertical slits, and the iris was a pulsing, bruised violet. And then I realized why he hadn't stood up. Below his waist, Leo's legs weren't tucked under him, they were gone. In their place, a thick, dark mass of something that looked like obsidian roots was growing out of his hips, anchoring him deep into the floor of the cave. He wasn't sitting on the stone. He was becoming part of it. "They're hungry, Kia," Leo whispered, a single violet tear rolling down his cheek. "And they liked the way you tasted in your dreams." The air in the gallery suddenly shifted. The heavy silence was replaced by a sound that made my hair stand on end. It was the sound of thousands of tiny stone-hard claws scuttling along the ceiling above us. I looked up, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. The ceiling of the gallery wasn't just rock. It was alive. In the harsh, white glare of my flashlight, I saw hundreds, maybe thousands of them. They looked like porcelain dolls that had been shattered and glued back together with dark, oily clay. Their limbs were long, spindly, and jointed in ways that defied human anatomy, clicking and snapping as they moved. They didn't have eyes, just smooth, pale surfaces where faces should have been, reflecting my light in a dull, sickening glow. They were the old ones, and they were watching me with their skin. "Kia, don't look away," Leo's voice rasping behind me. "They don't like it when you look away. It makes them feel forgotten." I backed away, my boots scraping against the cold limestone. My hand went to my holster, my fingers brushing against the cold steel of my Glock, but I didn't draw it. Deep down, I knew that lead wouldn't do anything against things that had been carved out of the mountain's soul long before man learned to walk upright. One of the creatures descended from the ceiling, its movements fluid yet jerky, like a marionette being pulled by invisible, frantic hands. It landed 5 feet in front of me with a sound like a heavy, wet bag hitting the floor. Up close, the smell of rotting wildflowers was suffocating. It tilted its head, mimicking the exact movement I had made seconds before. It opened its mouth, a jagged horizontal slit that tore across the smooth white skin of its face. From that dark void came a sound that broke my heart. "Kia, come home, baby. Dinner's getting cold." It was my grandmother's voice. Not a mimicry, not a recording, but her exact tone, her exact inflection. The creature's throat vibrated with the sound, but its face remained a blank porcelain mask. "Stop it," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're not her. You're nothing." The creature clicked. It reached out a long, pale finger, a finger that ended in a sharp obsidian claw and pointed at Leo. Leo was no longer humming. He was sinking. The dark obsidian roots were crawling up his chest, turning his skin into the same oily black stone as the cave walls. He wasn't screaming. He looked peaceful. That was the most terrifying part. He had accepted the mountain's embrace. "He was the first course," the creature whispered, still using my grandmother's voice. "But you are the guardian. You carry the blood of the people who knew our names. We don't want to eat you, Kia. We want you to remember us." The scuttling sound on the ceiling grew louder. The other creatures were descending now, surrounding me in a circle of pale, twitching limbs. The air in the gallery grew thick with the smell of stagnant water and old earth. My flashlight started to flicker. The battery, which should have lasted for hours, was dying. The shadows at the edges of the room began to stretch, leaning toward me like they were hungry for my warmth. "Remember what?" I shouted, my back hitting a cold, damp pillar of rock. The creature stepped closer. It reached out and touched the badge on my chest. Its claw left a deep, jagged scratch in the metal. "Remember the bargain," it hissed. "A life for the forest, a soul for the silence. Your ancestors kept the rim quiet. They gave us the lost ones, the wanderers, the ones who didn't respect the trees. In return, we let your people live. But now, the wanderers are everywhere. They bring their lights, their machines, their noise. They have forgotten the old ones." The creature leaned in, its face inches from mine. I could see the fine cracks in its porcelain skin, the way its body seemed to be made of shifting tectonic plates. "You will stay, Kia. You will be the new anchor. You will sit where Leo sits, and you will hum the songs that keep the mountain from waking up. If you don't, if you leave, the rim will not just breathe. It will scream, and the scream will tear your world apart." I looked at Leo. He was almost gone now. Only his face remained human, staring at me with those pulsing violet eyes. I looked at the creatures, their blank faces waiting for my answer. My flashlight gave one final, desperate pulse and died. Total darkness swallowed the gallery. But I wasn't blind. In the void, I could see the violet glow of their eyes, not in front of me, but inside my own mind. They were showing me the rim. They were showing me the thousands of hikers, the families in their cabins, the children playing near the trailheads. And then they showed me what would happen if the mountains screamed. I felt the cold, oily roots start to brush against my ankles. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a physical weight, pressing against my eyeballs and filling my lungs with the scent of cold, ancient stone. The roots, those obsidian, oily tendrils, began to coil around my boots. I could feel them through the leather, cold as a dead man's grip, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that matched the vibration of the cave itself. "The bargain, Kia," the voice of my grandmother whispered, coming from every direction at once. "It is a small price for the safety of the many. One soul to keep the mountains silent. One life to guard the seam." I felt my knees buckle. The fatigue I had been fighting since I stepped onto the trail finally caught up to me. But it wasn't just physical. It was a spiritual exhaustion, a siren song beckoning me to just sit down, to let the roots take hold, and to stop fighting the inevitable. I looked toward the spot where Leo had been. He was gone now. In his place was a jagged pillar of black stone that pulsed with a faint violet internal light. He wasn't dead, not in the way we understand it. He had been transformed into a living battery for the mountain's hunger. But as the roots crawled up to my shins, something snapped inside me. It wasn't my training as a ranger, and it wasn't the Glock on my hip. It was a memory, a real one, not the twisted version the old ones were using. I remembered my grandmother sitting on her porch, looking out at the rim, and she wasn't just talking about fear. She was talking about respect. "The old ones don't want us to fear them, Kia," she had said one night, the smoke from her pipe curling into the air. "They want us to acknowledge them. They are the land, and the land does not want to be served by slaves. It wants to be walked by people who know where the boundaries are. I reached into the pocket of my vest, and my fingers brushed against the camera I had taken from the ledge, Leo's camera. I pulled it out. My flashlight was dead, but the camera still had a sliver of battery life. I didn't turn on the screen. Instead, I fumbled for the flash button. I stood up, the roots snapping and groaning as I forced my legs to move. "I am not your anchor," I shouted into the void. "I am the ranger of this rim. I am the one who tells the wanderers where they can and cannot go. I acknowledge you, but I do not serve you." I pressed the shutter button. Flash. For a microsecond, the gallery was flooded with an artificial, blinding white light. In that split second, I saw them. They weren't just surrounding me. They were cowering. The old ones, the porcelain-skinned mimics, screeched, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. They covered their smooth, featureless faces with their spindly limbs, their bodies smoking where the flash had touched them. They didn't hate the light because it hurt them. They hated it because it revealed them. It stripped away the mystery they used to paralyze their prey. Flash. I fired the flash again, moving toward the narrow tunnel I had come through. Each burst of light was a weapon, carving a path through the sea of violet eyes. I felt the roots around my legs wither and retreat, hissing as they shrank back into the cracks in the floor. I ran. I didn't care about the low ceiling or the sharp rocks. I ran through the narrow squeeze, my breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. Behind me, the gallery erupted into a cacophony of whistles, hundreds of them, all mimicking my grandmother, all calling me back, all crying out in a language of grief and fury. I reached the first chamber, the circle of stone cairns. I didn't walk around them this time. I kicked through them, shattering the delicate balance, sending the stones clattering across the oily floor. The whistling stopped instantly. The cave went silent, a silence so sudden it made my ears ring. I scrambled up the limestone ledge and burst out of the cave mouth, just as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed over the Mogollon Rim. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I didn't look back until I was miles down the forest road, the sun finally cresting the horizon and turning the pines into gold. When the search and rescue team arrived later that morning, I told them I found the camera, but no sign of Leo. I told them the cave was unstable, that the limestone was shifting, and that it was too dangerous to enter without specialized equipment. I made sure they officially closed the Shadow Cave trailhead. Permanently. I still have Leo's camera. I never turned it on again. I keep it in a locked box in my basement away from the light. Because sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows from the north and the rim is shrouded in clouds, I can hear a faint electronic beep coming from that box, like a shutter clicking. And on the nights when it's especially quiet, I find myself humming a 3-note melody I haven't heard since I was a child. I try to stop, but the song isn't in my head. It's in my bones. I am still a ranger. I still patrol the rim. But I no longer carry just a radio and a gun. I carry a pocket full of cornmeal and a heart full of heavy, silent respect. Because I know that beneath the beauty of the pines, the mountain is still breathing, and it's still waiting for someone to remind it that it hasn't been forgotten.